Welcome to the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, and I'm joined by my co-host and producer to the stars, Chris Brito. We have our first star-level player involved in trade rumors this season. We'll also break down our early thoughts on the in-season tournament. Before we get to all that, Chris, my friend, how are you?
Hey, Stevie. Happy to be here again on the All Hoops podcast. The Zach LaVine news doesn't really come as a surprise, but I think we all know that this Bulls team was probably headed nowhere, and I'm just happy that we get a resolution to that problem too. So let's break down what happened. Is that the Bulls have only won a few games this season,
4-9.
4-9. Zach LaVine and the Bulls have expressed interest in moving on from each other. So the place that I think Zach would probably be best in, for his role and for where he is in his career, probably somewhere like the Lakers. The reason being that I know that there's already the two-headed monster with Anthony Davis and LeBron, but I think with the addition of LaVine, they become a more serious threat in the West and to the Nuggets. And selfishly, I don't want him anywhere in the Eastern Conference. I don't want him anywhere in the Heat. The Heat don't need to get better. The Heat are already a threat. So that's where I stand with the Zach LaVine rumors.
See, I feel the opposite. I don't think LaVine is that kind of player that should strike fear into you. And where if the Heat say, hey, we want to take on Zach LaVine's 4 years and $180 million, I would say, great, please do. Because all of a sudden, if Donovan Mitchell becomes available in a couple months after the season, if he goes, I'm not re-signing in Cleveland trades him, you know who's going to be on the front of that list? It's going to be Miami and the Knicks. And you know who's going to be smarter in getting a superstar player like that? Is it going to be Miami or the Knicks? That's why I'd rather see LaVine go to Miami and get them out of the way. Get them out of the way for the next guy the Knicks want. Because LaVine, to me, is this guard Randall. You know, when it's going well, it looks pretty good, but he doesn't play any defense. He's not the most efficient guy. And then aside from the difference between him and Randall is Randall plays. LaVine has been hurt pretty much every year except for last year. He's got knee problems. It's a scary contract, Chris. And everybody you kind of hear from who's talking about this is basically saying, well, the value the Bulls are going to get is not going to be in a treasure trove of picks. It's going to be in getting off of his contract, similar to what the Wizards did with Bradley Beal. And the consensus around the Bradley Beal trade was, well, the Wizards really screwed up not doing this 2 years ago. And that's kind of how I feel about the Bulls. Just going for this 9 seed every year just didn't make any sense when they started it. It didn't make any sense last year. And it doesn't make sense now.
I think it did make sense for the Bulls when they did it, but they did it when they had Lonzo Ball. And I think when they had Lonzo Ball, this was still a team who was interesting.
Yeah.
But they really didn't make any improvements around that team after that. So that's where I sort of agree with you.
It's funny because just
listen,
go ahead.
You're playing. I didn't even think about it that way, but you're completely right in the sense that Zach LaVine going to Miami makes perfect sense for the Knicks.
I mean,
that was chess level thinking.
Would a Tyler Hero for LaVine swap? Maybe Lowry's in there to make the contracts work because LaVine makes so much money. Does that make sense for both sides? I think the Bulls kind of have this inflated thought of what their players are worth. That seems to be the consensus around the league of why those guys, DeRozan, LaVine, Caruso, haven't been moved in the last couple of years because they're asking for the moon for their guys. Is that enough for LaVine? I think if I'm the Heat, I wouldn't want to do that. I think Hero, you can make the case. I can make the case that Hero's, best basketball is ahead of him and LaVine's best basketball is behind him. Not that I think LaVine's going to go into a steep decline immediately, but is he going to look like a 23, 25 point a game guy who's playing every game for the next 4 years of this contract? I don't think so.
Well, I think it really comes down to one thing. The best player the Bulls are going to get is probably going to be your hero, your boy. Because like you said, I think a lot of the other teams are trying to just get rid of him. I mean, trying to trade contracts just to shed his salary, as you said. And I think if the Bulls are looking toward the future, they want to have a cornerstone, and I think Hero could be that. Not the cornerstone, but one of them. And so if you're gonna do a rebuild, do it completely. And I think that's where you want to start.
Yeah.
And, and if you get that other kid Jokic too, from Miami, and I think you're onto
Jaime
something.
Jaquez has looked good for them on the Bulls. If I can't get Hero, maybe that's Jaime Jaquez, Nicole was it Nikola Jovic? I would probably
Which,
try to
yeah,
go get those guys and say, hey, we're tearing this thing down. Obviously, again, the time to do this was 2 years ago. You could have been in the Wemby sweepstakes. You could have had a couple more young players on this team right now.
yeah.
Instead, they're trying to do this in a year where LaVine's making so much money that they're not going to get much. Like if you get Hero, they deserve a pat on the back. I don't see that really happening. And then also like this is considered at this moment, things could change. One of the worst draft classes we've seen in about 10 years. And so the time to blow it up
Was last year.
was last year, was 2 years ago again. And it doesn't sound like if they move LaVine, it doesn't sound like they're guaranteed to move DeRozan and Vucevic and Caruso. It sounds like they want to they don't want to be out of the mix because I mean, for whatever reason, I mean, Reinsdorf and this ownership group has never really thought about the big picture. It seems like they're always kind of like, how do we maximize now and get ticket sales and be relevant? And to me, it's just not
How
the
do we get
forward
Michael
way.
Jordan back in a uniform?
What do you say?
How do we get Michael Jordan back in a uniform?
Right. I mean, that's kind of where they're at. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's gonna be very interesting. I'm curious to see how that plays out. You mentioned the Lakers. I think it's an interesting fit. If I'm the Lakers, I would not want to do that because to me that sounds like the Westbrook thing again, where they finally have restacked the cupboard of role players. Russell can play, Hachimura can play, Reeves can play. Like now we're gonna trade all these guys to make the salary fit to go get a new big three. And Levine's not really a shooter.
Mm.
Like, I mean, he's better than Westbrook was in terms of shooting, but you're going to take three guys who are all not there's not an elite
But
shooter
but
in
I
that
think
group, and they're all injury prone.
but here's the thing though with that. I think you want Zach LaVine because you want to lessen the load for LeBron during the season. And I know about LaVine's injury
That's
issues.
fair.
And I think long term, if you're the Lakers, like, okay, let's just say it pans out with Zach LaVine. Now you have two players to build around your Lakers squad with Anthony Davis and Zach LaVine for the next few years. And who knows what LeBron is thinking or what he wants to do. So I think that actually gives the Lakers some leverage as well in the future. That being said, um, I think his addition to the Lakers would be great for LeBron's career, and his obviously his career too. But
Yeah,
the one thing I know for sure is that I want the Knicks nowhere near this man.
agreed.
That's
Agreed.
that's the one thing I know for sure.
Yeah, I just don't think he'd make them better. I don't think he's like what they need is they need another secondary ball handler, which he is. But they're gonna have to create offense for him. I don't really trust Thibodeau to be able to do that, right? And again, my biggest concern is this giant contract on a very, very injury plagued player. This is a guy who is in the last 7 seasons, he's played 70 games once, and it was last year. And guess what? Now they're like, oh, he's available. Like yeah, of course he's available, but I don't know. I think we're on the same page with this, Chris. Obviously, we hope to see him play his best basketball moving forward, whether that's with the Lakers, the Heat, some contender, maybe Philly. Philly could use
Really, yeah.
another scoring punch, so that could be an interesting one. But let's move on. Let's talk about this in-season tournament. And Chris, it's been very interesting start to the in-season tournament. There are things we like, there's things we don't like. I'd love to hear your thoughts so far on how it's playing out.
So I don't mind it. I think the NBA obviously gets points for experimenting and trying something new. And I think, how many times do American sport leagues try something like this? That being said, the execution I kind of give like a C plus, mostly because if you have avid basketball fans like you and me,
Yeah,
sort of asking like, oh, when is the in-season tournament game
right.
versus a regular season game? Like, I think that's kind of where it lies the problem. And granted, you need some time to make these changes more like obvious. Um, we didn't even know like when the Knicks were going to wear their cool jerseys or when the courts are going to be a certain way. I think the designs on the courts are kind of flashy, kind of interesting. It's not my favorite thing, but it's fine. I get it. The other criticism I have or suggested changes is I would probably make these games in a shorter period instead of them being across 3 or 4 weeks or whatever it is. I would probably make it all 2 weeks. Um, Mostly because I just don't see the point in like getting the slow burn, especially if you want people to be invested in it. Um, and I get that. I also get that you're facing the NFL during like basically every other night that basketball isn't on. So I get that too, but I
Yeah,
think
but they could stagger it to just make it days the NFL's not on. Like,
yeah, but think about it. You're facing them on a Monday, you're facing them on a Thursday, and you're facing them on a Sunday. So then NBA has 4 days to work with. Oh, and not even mentioning like college football. But really the biggest mistake here, I think, is making it this early in the season. And I think you need to make it toward a little closer to the All-Star break and after the Super Bowl. Um, or literally after the All-Star break when there's like you can sort of give a pretense of um of the playoffs, like a
yeah,
precursor to the playoffs.
I
Like
think that's a great idea. I really do.
um and finally, and I don't think this even has anything to do with the prize money. I think the players are somewhat invested. I don't think they're like overly invested, but like Damian Lillard said it best, like that's game-changing money for some of the players on my team, and that's worth it. And like that's cool. It's cool of him to say that.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head here. I think the two things they can do better, one, maybe make it a little later in the season. You brought up post Super Bowl. I think that's a great idea. 2 weeks after the All-Star break, early March, right before March Madness, you can make this kind of
Mhm.
like a, hey, you want your bracket? Here's your pro bracket. Something along those lines. I think that's a
Yes.
great idea. Early here. I mean, I don't know if you can call it March Madness, but you can call it something. And I think there's definitely a way to do that involved there. And then in terms of like the investment of the players, I think they got that down. Now I think how do they invest the fans? How do they invest teams to care about this? People have kind of brought up giving like the last pick in the draft, like of the first round. I mean, it's like the 31st pick. There's talking about the 15th pick. There's talking about no prize. I think they definitely need to keep experimenting with like how do they make people like us care? And obviously, if our team was in the play-in championship this year, I think you and I would be very, very excited. So I'm not even sure they need to incentivize the fans, but in terms of getting teams to care, um, I'm curious how that plays out. Obviously, the more years you do this, the more this becomes ingrained with the NBA, where this becomes like a real prize.
Yeah.
But for now, it seems a little artificial. Um, and I think the biggest issue is just we just don't know when these games are. Um, there have been, I know they've been like some Tuesdays, some Fridays, sometimes, you should have every team playing on those days for one. Like there was an in-season tournament day like 2 Tuesdays ago, and the Knicks weren't playing, and I was like, wait, is this going on today? I'm confused.
Yeah.
I think the courts being different have allowed people to go, okay, this is a different game. This is some significance to this. So I think they've done that part right. I think some of the courts are pretty ugly, but at the same time, they have been well received in that they're different. And I think, the NBA is onto the right track here. It's just going to come down to tinkering a little more, pushing this thing back. And then
Yeah.
I think this could be a pretty fun thing going forward.
And this is great for a coach like Tibbs because
Yeah.
he loves leaving his starters in at the very end. And so like the Knicks were up maybe 10, 15 points with like 4 minutes to go or 3 minutes to go. And he left the starters into like a minute left or whatever it is. And the Knicks kept pouring it on because I don't know if this is I mean, this is probably not the reason why Tibbs left them in, but it worked to the Knicks' advantage because the outside of wins, I think the point differentials, like the next one of the next or third.
It's tiebreaker, then point differential.
Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think that's a great point, Chris, because like literally, you always hear about these bad beats, right? And in terms of betting. And Kevin Herter yesterday hit a layup, basically at the buzzer,
Yeah.
and this layup got the Kings to cover the 9.5. And so all of a sudden, the bettors are rejoicing, and like that's not something that would like. There's nothing worse than losing a bet when the team just has the ball and they're dribbling it out, or they're going to take the turnover because it's like not respectful. Now, like players and teams like want to score those last points. So keeping the game going for those last few seconds, I think is I think it's great. And
Yeah, that's a
good
great
job by
point.
the NBA making that a little wrinkle in here with the tiebreaker.
I agree. I like that.
All right, Chris, moving on. Our last segment here. What's the best surprise team so far? Where, 10, 12 games into the season for most teams. Let's hear yours.
So I have two answers. The first one being the Rockets. I think them being so good defensively in a very tough West is so far surprising. I believe they're in the top five in the West. And it's just a team that I didn't have high expectations for. And like right now, if the playoffs started today, they'd be in there. So that's one of them. Um, the Sixers to me are also the other surprising team. Like I didn't expect them to be this good after Harden got traded, but if anything, I expect them to. I don't know. They kind of give the Celtics a good run for the money the other night, and I don't know what you do. Do you make a trade for another player at this point? Like I don't know.
That's a great question. We mentioned LaVine for them. I don't know. It's going so well that like I don't really want to mess it up. I want to see how this plays out until February. But Chris, they're second in the East. They're 9-3. And I think the most important part is Embiid seems really happy with what's going on. Yeah, they were talking to Tobias Harris, and he's like, "Man, I'm free here. Like I feel free. I can impact the game, not just defensively or spotting up for three. People are telling me I'm overpaid because like all I'm doing is sitting in the corner. That's not his choice. He didn't want to do that. Now he's becoming an important part of this team again. And I think the biggest thing is Maxi. He had a 50-point game the other night. He looks like a legit all-star. He's emerged. He's one of the top 5 guards right now to start the season.
Yeah.
It's been unbelievable. So
So
those are two great picks, Chris.
so yeah, I just wanted to make a note. The Rockets the Rockets are sixth in the West, but I still think their early start is very impressive, led by Dylan Brooks.
I mean, I think the most shocking part about the Rockets is Dylan Brooks says he went there to get a bigger role. His shot attempts have gone way down from about 13 and a half last year to about 8. And he's shooting way more efficiently. He's so far there's been no issues about him being a teammate. People seem to like him. He's playing great defense. And that team is finding an identity defensively. And I think he being there is a major part of the reason why.
Oh, definitely.
So, all right, my team, I went the opposite with in terms of that defensive identity. The Indiana Pacers have found themselves an identity, and it's not defense, it is offense, and it is so fun to watch. They are leading the NBA in scoring at 126 and a half points a game. They are giving up so many points. So basically, we talk about that maxi 50-point game. That was against the Pacers. And then the next night, they play the Pacers again, and the Pacers scored like 135 points and blow the Sixers' doors off. They're just so great offensively. They play a really fast-paced system. Halliburton has gone from being a really great all-star caliber player to above that. He's a superstar. And if you look at this roster, there's not a lot of help to Halliburton right now. Like nobody is really, their numbers don't really jump off the page. Like I thought Ben Mathurin was going to take a leap and become a 17, 18 point a game guy in his second year. That has not happened. Buddy Hield is not putting up big points. Miles Turner's putting up his respectable 17, but no one else is, past like 12 points a game on this team. So they're just running and gunning. Halliburton looks amazing, and they're leading the NBA in scoring. And so I think literally they can just score their way to a playoff spot or at least a play-in spot. And just, I don't think they're going to win anything the way they're playing, but it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
I can't wait to see them play against the Knicks, honestly. Like it's such a clash of like styles too.
It's great because Halliburton, believe it or not, has never been on TNT. He's never had a TNT game because he was on the Kings and they
What?
were never putting the Kings on. And then when the Kings got good, Halliburton was traded. So he's never had a TNT game, and he's having one. I believe it's in January. And I think Brian Windhorst talked to Halliburton about this and basically said like, "Hey, like, are you excited for like your national TV game?" And Halliburton knew the day of the game, like off the top of his head, like January whatever versus whoever. And he backtracked it later saying, "Well, it's my girlfriend's birthday, so that's how I remember the day." But like that's gonna be a good one. Good job by like, it's gonna be cool. Cause like you think, oh, these players don't care about any of this stuff. They care.
Oh yeah. I'm like amazed at that. Oh, it's against the Celtics, January 3rd.
Celtics. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that'll be a good one. So I'm very excited to see that, and obviously it's fun to see new young teams kind of emerging. Chris, the Pacers, the Rockets, even Philly seems like a breath of fresh air with with no James Harden. So yeah, that's going to be pretty cool. Let's get to our final thoughts now. We mentioned the LaVine rumors. The other team I'm going to watch in terms of trade rumors is the Raptors. Chris, what are they doing here? They're a below average team. Maybe they're average on some nights. They compete hard. They have a new coach. But this is becoming Scotty Barnes' team. He's kind of taking the next step. I don't know if that next step includes Pascal Siakam. They're just so similar. And Siakam's a free agent at the end of the year. You're going to give him $40+ million a year. Does he want to take your $40+ million a year? Then you have OG Anunoby, who's a free agent at the end of the year. Does he want to take your $40+ million a year? If you sign those both guys back up, you're going to have a below average roster and you're going to be in the luxury tax. So I don't really know what their plan is, but Masai Ujiri, I'm always worshiping as one of the greatest executives in sports. And you're shaking your head, you're rolling your eyes, and I think for good measure, because the last couple of years he's kind of just sat on his hands. He's let Van Vliet walk. He's not improved this team in a significant way. And I just don't really know where they're going here. Because like they don't like they're different than the Bulls in that they don't seem to care about the plan. They don't really want to be in the middle, but they're not doing anything to change it.
Yeah, and like and OG has been in trade talks for like for 4 seasons, I think.
Yeah.
And I think on some level, like I don't know if OG has high value like the way that he thinks he does. But if I'm thinking in terms of the future, given between the both of them, I would probably keep OG on an OB.
I mean, OG's a very quality player. He's a 16 point a game guy. He shoots the ball well. He plays great defense. That's a guy I would want on my team. But at the same time, they're asking for like 3 or 4 first round picks from every team. And you got to go pay him $40 million a year after the season.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's a lot
Because
to give up for a guy who's not an all-star.
well, I think on one end, I think they just don't want to trade him and like they want a King's
But
ransom.
are they going to pay him then? Like, it doesn't
They
seem like
are.
they have a direction. You think they'll
I
pay
think
him?
I think they are. I mean, I think given the asking price, that just means like I'm that just means to me like the team is very comfortable with him. The team does not want to move on with him. And if they do, it has to be a king's ransom for it. So
But like, as the days of him under contract go away, that King's ransom should get lower, and it has not gotten lower. He's got a player option for next year for $19 million. He's not
and
picking that up.
yeah, I
So
don't
I don't
disagree.
know. That's definitely a team I'm watching. If I were them, I would blow the whole thing up, as you know, and we'll see. I love Scotty Barnes, and again, they're a competitive team. If the goal is, if you have an ownership group that's just like, I don't want to tear this thing down, I want to be as relevant and competitive as I possibly can. They're kind of doing that. They have a lot of players that other teams would want.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
for
to me,
sure.
that's not how I want to build my team. Anything else, Chris, for your final
Uh,
thoughts?
just for me, I was watching the Suns play the Utah Jazz on ESPN on Friday night, and you know the Suns are amazing in terms of like their two top heavy guys like Durant and Booker. Those two have a great team. but the quality of the rest of the team severely drops after that. And obviously, you want to see what the team looks like with Beal, but you needed to have a 15 assist game from Booker and 20 something points, and then another 30 points on very efficient shooting to beat a team like the Utah Jazz. So I don't know, man. I feel like that's asking a lot for them from those two guys. Um, and if it doesn't all work out, I'm very curious to see what happens to this team. It probably will work out. I'm just saying that's something I'm keeping an eye out for.
But again, like that's a very similar situation to what you're talking about with the Lakers with LaVine. It's 3-star injury prone players with a cast of nothing around them. And so far in Phoenix, Booker has not been healthy. Now he's back. Beal is now out 3 more weeks with the back problem. Back problems are serious. This is not a we're resting him for the playoffs kind of thing. This is he's got a major injury and we're gonna figure out how to get him through the season.
Yeah.
That's a problem, especially because like Beal is not an easy guy to just plug into an offense. He doesn't play defense. He needs the ball in his hands, and he's a great scorer. But again, he needs the ball in his hands, and so does Booker, and so does Durant, and none of them are point guards. So
Yeah.
I think it's
Booker
I'm
looked good
wondering
in
if this is
in
gonna
the point guard role though, but I get what you're saying too.
I wonder if this is gonna become very similar to the Clipper situation when they first got Kawhi and Paul George, which is I kept saying it doesn't matter. They have the talent. They'll figure it out in the playoffs. And
Hmm.
I'm kind of thinking you need to develop that chemistry. You need to develop some cohesion in the regular season, or it's just not going to work out. There's just too much talent, especially in the West, to just kind of learn on the fly when you get to April, May, and June. So, not that they're in trouble now. It's too early to say that, but like you get to January, February, and Beal's still not out there, and they're still kind of losing those games, or they're barely squeaking by to the teams you described, then it's time to start keeping an eye on them.
Great.
Anything else, Chris?
No, man, that's it. I had just had one last thought about the Sixers and James Harden
Yeah,
deal with the Clippers. They really should have gotten Noel. Um,
Norman Powell.
Norman Powell. Like I'm thinking like the Sixers are probably good enough right now, but they probably need like one more scorer type. And I think could have been a guy like that. But listen, the team is doing well. And they're one of my surprise teams so far. And I think we'll see what it is moving forward.
I love it. That's going to do it for us here on the All Hoops podcast. Thank you for watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify and Apple. We'll be back next week to discuss more NBA action.
Bye, everyone.